Dana White's Contender series began in 2017 and has quickly become the UFC's primary tool used to recruit regional talent. The Ultimate Fighter produced multiple champions and Hall of Famers, but so far we haven't seen similar success from DWCS alumni. Of course, we still need to give these guys a bit more time, but fans online are beginning to notice a trend with how many DWCS fighters appear weekly on cards, and bettors are beginning to routinely fade the Contender Series debuting fighter. With so much hype and exposure behind these fighters from DWCS, 64% of 146 debut fighters were clear betting favorites into their UFC debut. So the cappers are right with how often these fighters are favorites, and that made me wonder how well do they actually do in their debuts. I tracked every fighter who was awarded a contract on DWCS from Season 1 to Season 5, and I gathered their overall UFC debut results, their total UFC record from the time they were awarded a contract, and I also did a bit of an odds analysis that we'll recap at the end. Has DWCS proven to be successful? My name is Crispy, and this is my 5-year analysis of Dana White's Contender Series. Season 1 of the Contender Series was advertised to fans as being a tool to sign the top regional prospects by giving them a platform to showcase their skills right in front of Dana White and on ESPN+. Especially early on, the UFC brass strongly focused on only signing fighters who had dominant finishes on the show. While it's unrealistic to expect every prospect to pan out, the way the show was promoted to fans gave them a ton of hype to eat up about these debuting fighters. Season 1 aired in 2017, and the UFC awarded 16 contracts during that initial summer. The Sugar Show was born, household names like Jeff Neal and Grant Dawson were signed, as well as Alex Perez, who would become the first Contender Series title challenger. 15 out of 16 of the contract winners were betting favorites or pick'ems in their UFC debut, and they had a collective debuting record of just 9-7. Since being signed, Season 1 contract winners have a UFC record of 44, 43, and 2 with 2 no contests, a below 500 48.4% win percentage. There are multiple reasons why the combined record isn't great, and I'll talk about the explanations at the end, but one of them that is pretty evident from Season 1 is that it's just rare to be that good in the UFC. It's simply rare to be able to find people to compete amongst the best of the best and be able to have a stellar record. We see here in Season 1 that there were 16 contract winners, and only 6 have a winning record in the UFC as of mid-July 2022. Being that good is just simply rare, and if the promotion can find a few gems in each season, then I would consider that to be a success. Returning in the summer of 2018 with DWCS Season 2, the promotion would sign and award contracts to 23 more fighters from the regional scene. Signing more and more fighters each season will be a trend that you'll begin to see. Season 2 features a good bit of UFC talent with a few fighters currently ranked like Ryan Spann, Macy Barber, Jimmy Crute, and Sadiq Youssef, and a few of them who were formerly ranked like Ian Heinisch, Edmund Shabazian, and Antonina Shevchenko. Much like Season 1, however, 20 out of 23 Season 2 alumni were pick'ems or the betting favorite in their UFC debut, but they only managed to have a combined debuting record of 12-10 with 1 no contest. It's interesting that we don't see a reaction to Season 1's results by either the betting public or by the UFC in terms of their matchmaking. The public was still buying into the hype of these prospects despite the poor results from Season 1, and the UFC was potentially still trying to find the right recipe when it comes to who to pair the fighter against in their debut. I spotlighted the talent to come from Season 2, but once again the data doesn't reflect the success rates that a few of the fighters have found. With a combined UFC record of 64-70 with 5 no contests, Season 2 fighters actually have the lowest combined win percentage when compared to the other seasons at just 46%. We will begin to see the win percentages increase each season, but not until Season 3 in 2019 because Season 2 featured a separate series in 2018 that was held in Brazil, and unfortunately it also yielded some similar results in terms of their debuting fighters. The UFC signed 11 fighters from Season 2 Brazil, and the alumni went 5-5-1 in their UFC debuts. This has been the only time that the UFC has held a DWCS mini-season in another country, and despite the poor debut results, I would say that the UFC had a very successful season, with 7 out of the 11 contract winners eventually becoming ranked. Taila Santos became the first woman from DWCS to fight for a belt. Marina Rodriguez is currently ranked number 3. Augusto Sakai, Thiago Moises, Johnny Walker, Rogério Bontorin, and Raulian Paiva all were ranked at some point as well, and I still think a few of them have a good amount of potential left. With the majority of contract winners being ranked at some point in their UFC career, you would anticipate that they would have a decent combined UFC record. Season 2 Brazil fighters combined to have a 35-31-3 record, a 50.7% win percentage. As you can see, most of them have near even records in the UFC, but there are a few outliers on either side that can sway the record positively or negatively. Marina Rodriguez has a good chance at becoming the first DWCS champion. Many thought that Taila Santos should have already claimed that title, but regardless, that gives us a look at the level of talent brought to the UFC from this mini-season held in Brazil. Statistically, one of the most successful seasons, if not the most successful season from the Contender Series, Season 3 seemed to be where things would turn around in terms of debut success and overall UFC success. Whether due to shifts in strategies from the UFC or just general coincidence, Season 3 debut fighters would have the best results in their UFC debuts, winning 18 out of their 29 first fights. NFB means no fight booked, so while 30 contracts were awarded, only 29 fighters made their UFC debut. Looking at the debut odds, which are all closing lines from bestfightodds.com, you can see that a lot of the big favorites in the minus 300s to 400s. I thought this would be important to document as it would be cool to see how often the minus 300 and above debut fighters would win. I'll go over those findings later, but let's transition to Season 3 alumni's combined UFC record. Record-wise, Season 3 stands out on top again with a combined UFC record of 71-58 with 2 no contests, a 54.2% win percentage. Only Season 5 currently has a higher win percentage, but they have also had 90 fewer fights, and most of them haven't reached the next level of competition yet in their development. Season 3 features some studs like Jamal Hill and Andre Muniz, who I believe can both challenge for a world title in the future, as well as the undefeated Tracy Cortez. 8 fighters have managed to accumulate more than 4 UFC wins already, and a few already have over 5. It seems like a lot of these fighters are on the edge of making major career transitions, whether into the rankings, main event slots, or title shots, so keep an eye out for what these guys have in store next. Season 4 alumni feel a little different to me because they still have a bit of a rookie prospect feel to them compared to prior seasons. Possibly due to when these fighters were making themselves known, with 35 debuts between 2020 and 2022 and all of them fighting at the UFC Apex, it seems like we are just now getting a glimpse of their popularity and potential. Looking at the Season 4 debuts on the right side, there are a bunch of fighters who have signed to the UFC with a ton of hype going into their debut. Nearly 3/4 of fighters were favorites or pick'ems in their debuts, with a good amount of them being well over a 2-1 favorite. Once again, the hype seems to inflate the lines, as the debut results being a mere 16-19 does not add up with how the betting public saw the fights going, with only 14 out of 26 favorites being victorious. Much like Season 3, Season 4 Contender Series alumni seem to be knocking on the door of finding out how great they are. Dustin Jacoby, Uroš Medic, Adrian Yanez, Carlos Olberg, Phil Hawes, Ignacio Bahamondes, and Jeff Molina are all prospects that I'm high on and that are either bordering on a ranking spot or a big fight. Dustin Jacoby and Adrian Yanez have set themselves apart record-wise from their peers, with Jacoby being 6-0-1 since re-signing with the UFC via a Contender Series contract, and Yanez 5-0 with 4 knockouts and 5 bonuses. With a combined UFC record of just 56-53-1, nearly 51%, I do expect that this will increase as a lot of these guys are gaining more and more experience and are getting out of that initial rookie stage. This would be a good point to mention another reason why the overall UFC record is decent but not great, and that reason is roster fillers. What I mean by that is not every fighter signed from the Contender Series is going to be a champion. The vast majority might not even get ranked, and the UFC has to be aware of this. They need and want fighters that are going to fill roster spots and fill cards every weekend that might not reach the highest heights in the sports, but that are going to be there for the action. Take a look at how many fighters get signed and end up going 0-3 or 1-3 in the UFC. There are a few of them each season. As I mentioned earlier, it's impossible to expect every fighter from the show to pan out, but what better way to promote and build hype behind these everyday fighters that are on your roster? Airing in the summer of 2021, Season 5 of the Contender Series might feature my favorite alumni class to come from the show. There are so many fighters from Season 5 that I am extremely high on, like Jack Della Maddalena, Jailton Almeida, Chidi Njokuani, Caio Bahayo, and Karina Silva. What about Slava Claus, Michael Morales, Javid Basharat, Martin Boudet? I mean, geez, there are so many good prospects that I'm starting to think that I might be buying into this hype myself. Let's talk about how they've actually done so far, though. With this being the most recent season, there are still 7 fighters who haven't made their debuts in the UFC just yet, but for the 32 who have so far, 23 out of 32 were the favorite or pick'ems, and they combined for a debut result of 19-13. 9 out of the 13 of the fighters who lost were either underdogs or pick'ems, so I would say that this is a pretty decent and expected result. In terms of UFC win percentage, Season 5 fighters take the top spot at 59.5%, but there are a few factors that contribute to this, such as having way fewer fights than everyone else, and also that most of these guys haven't taken that major step up in competition yet. A 25-17 record is certainly good on paper and trending in the right direction, but 4 fighters who are 2-0 make up for 32% of all Season 5 wins, and this shows how much room for change there is. I'm intrigued to follow the future of this class, as there are a lot of good prospects and interesting personalities that I think can make some waves in the sport. Alright, we've reached the results and totals portion where we'll collectively see how successful DWCS has been. 146 Contender Series contract winners have debuted so far in the UFC, and they've been successful more than not, having a record of 79, 65, and 1 with 1 no contest, just above a 54% win percentage. While certainly not bad and not out of the realm of what you would expect to see from debuting fighters, the number of resources spent and the amount of attention that is drawn to these athletes, you would expect that the UFC would want them to succeed as much as possible and possibly match them up more favorably in their debuts. I know I thought the odds were high behind these guys, but they were favored to win nearly 65% of the time, with 94 out of 146 debuts being outright betting favorites. The mindset behind bettors fading these fighters is that the hype push behind these guys causes the line to be unnecessarily high when their opponents are usually other fighters off the regional circuit or a current UFC tested guy. Favorites winning at nearly 62% of the time is somewhat surprising, but I'm not surprised that underdogs have only won a third of the time, and pick'ems, it's been nearly dead even, which you could anticipate. On the right, I grouped up the closing odds for these fighters, and you could see that the big favorites definitely aren't guaranteed locks to bet on. Taking that kind of chalk in MMA is bold, especially on a debuting guy. Even the minus 200s have only won over half of their fights. The same goes for underdogs, where plus 100s have won almost half of their fights, so that's not even a guaranteed fade play either. The one set play, however, is dogs over plus 200 and up combined to be 1 in 10, so that's a pretty established number that you could safely fade there, but for the most part, a lot of these debut guys should be left alone unless they're one of the hidden gems. How well have Contender Series alumni done overall in the UFC? Well, they've won just 50.7% of their fights, having a 295, 272, 6, and 9 no contests as a combined record. I really didn't know what to anticipate while I was gathering all of this data, but after considering all of the factors that determine the overall record, I really wasn't surprised, and it kind of made me look at DWCS in a completely different way. Factor number 1, like we mentioned earlier, it's just flat out rare to have a really good record in the UFC. The majority of people who make it to the UFC, DWCS or not, don't go on to be world champions, and most won't get ranked. So when it comes to talent recruitment, you really can't expect every prospect to become a contender. The problem is that the show is promoted to fans as 2 top regional guys fighting each other, so there is already a built-in narrative that most of these guys are UFC ready and can jump right into the Shark Tank, and then we see for some that they weren't quite ready for the big show yet. Factor number 2 is that a good amount of these fighters being brought in are solely there to serve as roster fillers. I'm sure that's not the intent of spending the resources to promote these guys, but having fighters that can consistently fill the 6 to 8 prelim spots each weekend is a great byproduct to have when you have a show nearly every weekend like the UFC does. The final factor centers around the UFC matchmaking itself. Primarily regarding debuts, it might be hard to gauge where these guys fit into the UFC, especially if they're coming off a finish on the show. Hype can build up quickly, and these guys might get pushed faster than a normal rookie would. As the seasons move on, it seems like the UFC is doing a better job at matchmaking these guys and maximizing the resources that they spend on them. Keep an eye out for a few gems here and there that you feel confident on, but otherwise you gotta let these fighters' careers pan out before we can assume that they're amongst the elite. To wrap up the video, here's a list of current undefeated fighters from the show who have had over 2 UFC wins so far. It'll be interesting to see how many of these guys are left in a year or two. With Season 6 of the Contender Series beginning very soon, I am interested to see if there are any changes made by the UFC now that they have 5 years of data under their belt. Same for the fans. Lately it feels like people are beginning to notice how much influence DWCS has on every event each week. The multi-purpose nature of the Contender Series leads me to believe that it will continue to be a staple of the UFC moving forward, and whether you're a casual fan, a gambler, or a hardcore, there are reasons for everybody to tune in and to pay attention to these prospects. Thank you for clicking on the video. This project took me months to complete, and I think that I came away with some cool takeaways and even had my mind changed about the Contender Series. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more research and stat-based UFC content. I'm planning to upload a lot more frequently, but if you want everyday content, follow my Twitter for more information about every weekend's cards. Thanks for your time and take care.